Just to bring you up to date on the news of Europe, if you're just turning on your radios, Great Britain is now at war with Germany. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced this fact in a broadcast at 6:15 New York time, 6:15 Eastern Daylight Time. A brief broadcast of about 5 minutes duration, which was carried over the CBS network. And the Prime Minister said that I have to tell you that we are now at war with Germany. We shall bring you further news as quickly as we have it, and we suggest that you keep tuned to your Columbia station.
This is London calling Columbia, New York. Now first, let's get in proper order the chronological developments of the day. At 9 o'clock this morning, London time, it was announced that a 2-hour ultimatum had been delivered to Germany, that at the end of that time, hostilities must cease, or Germany and Britain would be at war. At 11:15, the Prime Minister spoke to the nation.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Shortly after the Prime Minister's speech, the air raid sirens went off, and it wasn't a pleasant sound.
Edward R. Murrow, reporting from London on September 3rd, 1939.
Now to the German capital for the report of William L. Shirer. Go ahead, Berlin.
Good evening, this is Berlin. The decisive battle of the war has begun. That Adolf Hitler realizes it himself, he made plain in his proclamation to the troops in the West just as they began to march into the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg at dawn today. He said, "The hour of the decisive battle for the future of the German nation has come."
I had made up my mind in the beginning, of course, even when I went up there as a newspaper correspondent, that I would only stay in Nazi Germany as long as I could get the essence of the truth out. Nazi in any dictatorship, you can't tell everything. When the censors cut too much out, I would just say, okay. It was partly as a bluff to them, because the Germans wanted you on the air. They figured you weren't friendly, and you were from a foreign country, but that gave it all the more prestige if they allowed you to broadcast, and you were bound to give their point of view sometime. So when they didn't allow enough of my copy, I thought, to make the sense I wanted to, I refused to go on the air. You wrote differently. You wrote as you, when you wrote a script, you wrote it as you thought it would sound when you spoke. And of course, I had learned also from Hitler. Hitler was a man who could write out a speech, and the secret was to give it over the radio as if he was speaking ad lib. You almost say that radio made Hitler possible, made his conquest of power possible. There was nobody else.
Der nationale Stolz und ihre Zuversicht sind gestärkt worden angesichts dieser Demonstration der Kraft und Entschlossenheit und Geschlossenheit unseres Volkes. Gehen Sie nun wieder aus mit jenem gläubigen Vertrauen, das Sie durch fast 2 Jahrzehnte als Deutsche und Nationalsozialisten im Herzen trugen. Sie haben das Recht, das deutsche Haupt nun wieder mit Stolz erhoben tragen zu dürfen. Wir alle aber haben die Pflicht, es nie wieder unter einen fremden Willen zu beugen. Dies sei unser Gelöbnis, so wahr uns Gott helfe.
This is London. History has been made too fast over here today. First, in the early hours this morning, came the news of the British unopposed landing in Iceland. Then the news of Hitler's triple invasion came rolling into London, climaxed by the German air bombing of 5 nations. British mechanized troops rattled across the frontier into Belgium. Then, at 9 o'clock tonight, a tired old man spoke to the nation from number 10 Downing Street. He sat behind the big oval table in the cabinet room where so many fateful decisions have been taken during the 3 years that he has directed the policy of His Majesty's government. Neville Chamberlain announced his resignation. Mr. Chamberlain's announcement of his resignation was entirely impersonal. Many people consider that it was the best speech he has ever made. Winston Churchill, who has held more political offices than any living man, is now Prime Minister. He is a man without a party. For the last 7 years, he has sat in the House of Commons, a rather lonesome and often bellicose figure, voicing unheeded warnings of the rising tide of German military strength. Now, at the age of 65, Winston Churchill, plump, bald, with massive round shoulders, is for the first time in his varied career of journalist, historian, and politician, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Mr. Churchill now takes over the supreme direction of Britain's war effort at a time when the war is rapidly moving towards Britain's doorstep. Mr. Churchill's critics have said that he is inclined to be impulsive and at times vindictive. But in the tradition of British politics, he will be given his chance. He will probably take chances, but if he brings victory, his place in history is assured. The historians will have to devote more than a footnote to this remarkable man, no matter what happens. He enters office with the tremendous advantage of being the man who was right. He also has the advantage of being the best broadcaster in this country. Mr. Churchill can inspire confidence, and he can preach a doctrine of hate that is acceptable to the majority of this country. That may be useful during these next few months. Winston Churchill has never been known for his caution, and when he has completed the formation of his new government, you may expect this country to begin to live dangerously. Hitler has said that the action begun yesterday will settle the future of Germany for 1,000 years. Mr. Churchill doesn't deal in such periods of time, but the decisions reached by this new Prime Minister with his boyish grin and his puckish sense of humor may well determine the outcome of this war.
Elmer Davis reports on the evacuation of Dunkirk, June 1st, 1940.
The evacuation of the remainder of the Channel armies proceeded today, but under greater difficulties and with heavier losses than before. With the clearing up of fogs which had hung over the coast for 2 days past, the German Air Force got into action again, and withdrawal of troops made it possible for the Germans to bring artillery within range of the shore. They claim to have sunk 3 warships and 8 transports today, besides damaging many others. Whatever truth there is in that, Allied losses were certainly severe. However, it is believed in Paris that about 200,000 men have been got out so far, besides wounded, and that the British, French, and Belgian troops left are not more than 50,000. Some of these are still fighting their way toward the coast, and others, who served as a rear guard for the evacuation, are dug in on the sands around Dunkirk, with the guns of the Allied fleet serving as their artillery support, hoping that they may yet have a chance to get out too. And the British say that a small number of their troops, surrounded for days past, is still holding out in Calais.
Tomorrow, Eric Severide, who came to London after reporting the collapse of French resistance, leaves for Lisbon on the first leg of his journey home. Perhaps you'd like to know what an American reporter thinks about on his last night in London.
3 years ago tonight, I sailed from New York with a vague feeling that European history was about to burst of its own centrifugal force and that I wanted a close-up view. For knowledge of what's happening, you have to be here. For understanding, no. I still believe the American public has understood better these last few years where Europe was going than any public in Europe.
I don't think we thought in direct terms of a form or a style, or we weren't being literary historians, but we were given a little block of time. You know, you got 2-3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. To do what in that time? You know, we had to give what news there was. Somehow you had to give the background to it. You had to describe the physical environment of the story, if there was one. And out of this grew a kind of personalized news essay thing, trying not to be editorial and opinionated in it. I didn't have any real idea of the impact in this country till I came back. And that was a whole year later, 13, 14 months later. Then I realized it. I tried to imagine it, but I couldn't. You know, here I was, a young fellow at the Midwest, and I'd sit in some little telephone booth in the French PTT where we did broadcasts and sit down and try to stutter out this stuff. I couldn't conceive of The whole country was listening, let alone really reacting to it.
John Daly reports on CBS, The World Today, November 17th, 1941.
And now, John Daly. There were many major developments today at home and abroad. The headlines: Germans claim victory in the Crimea. Russians report gains around Moscow and Leningrad. President Roosevelt signs the neutrality law amendments. Captive coal mine strike ties up production, and Congress prepares anti-strike legislation. Japanese envoys begin negotiations with the President and Secretary of State Hull. Captured Axis ships revealed as German merchantmen. Those are the highlights. The Germans are also planning to extend their civil administration into Russia. Dr. Alfred Rosenberg has been given the job of restoring public order and public life, as the Nazis put it, in the occupied Russian territories and in the Baltic states. And the theories of Rosenberg give the Russians an idea of what they may expect under Nazi rule. For Rosenberg is an arch enemy of communism and Judaism, and the originator of the ideologies of the Nazi Party. It was Rosenberg who drew up the Nazi program of religion, a program that calls for elimination of anything that conflicts with National Socialism, that substitutes Mein Kampf for the Bible and the German sword for the cross. It was Rosenberg who convinced Hitler that the pre-World War type of anti-Semitism could be imported into Germany. He once wrote, "When we come to power, Jewish bodies will dangle from every telegraph pole between Munich and Berlin." And he preaches the doctrine that Christianity and Judaism are the religions of weaklings. Now, all civil administrations in occupied Russia will be subordinate to Rosenberg. His spokesman said that the return of private ownership in the eastern areas, as opposed to the communist theory of state ownership, would be within the scope of the Rosenberg administration. Several assistants will be appointed to rule various districts of Russia and the Baltic states under Rosenberg's direction. As to the permanency of the organization, Rosenberg's spokesman said that at present its assignment is strictly a wartime function. And that's the world today.
And now to the editorial room of the Jurgens Journal and Walter Winchell. Good evening, Mr. Mr. North and South America, and all the ships and clippers at sea. Let's go to press. Blanche, London. The terms of surrender for the Italian army in Ethiopia have just been handed to Mussolini's representatives. This will give England about 38,000 prisoners, bringing the number of Italians captured in Ethiopia to 200,000. London. Reports persisted in England today that the wife of Rudolf Hess has been arrested by the Nazi police. Vichy. United Press yesterday revealed this attitude by the Vichy government. It was explained that France was grateful for American food, but that this American aid, said France, was very little and unimportant. In fact, the word used was infinitesimal. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the absolute lowdown. How only a few shiploads of food to France helped the war effort of the Germans. 10 shiploads a week, amounting to 50,000 tons sent to France, would replace in calorie values 187,500 tons of potatoes, from which could be extracted 16,875 tons of alcohol, which would free 11,000 tons of gasoline, and that would enable 250 bombs and 250 Nazi fighting planes to raid London every night for 2 months. And that, ladies and gentlemen, winds up another edition of the Jurgens Journal until next Sunday night at the very same time. Until then, and with lotions of love, I remain your New York correspondent, Walter Winchell, who reminds you of the great difference in two systems of government. Rudolf Hess preferred to bail out over Britain than be out on bail in Berlin. Good night.
December 7th, 1941, from Washington. Albert Warner summarizes the reports coming from Pearl Harbor.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. The White House is now giving out a statement. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. The President's brief statement was read to reporters by Stephen Early, the President's secretary. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack, and hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the President would ask Congress for a declaration of war. There is no doubt from the temper of Congress that such a declaration would be granted. This morning, Secretary Hull talked with the Secretaries of War and of the Navy. Now the two special Japanese envoys, Admiral Nomura and Special Envoy Caruso, are at the State Department, engaged in conference with Secretary of State Hull. Their appearance at the State Department on this Sunday afternoon emphasizes the gravity of the Far Eastern situation, where hostilities now seem to be actually opening over the whole South Pacific. Even more important than the visit of Tokyo's diplomats is this news which comes from Pearl Harbor and the news which comes from South Asia. Whatever the diplomats from Tokyo or the cabinet in Tokyo may be saying, there is a conviction in official quarters here that Japan has now cast the die. And just now comes the word from the President's office that a second air attack has been reported on Army and Navy bases in Manila. Thus, we have official announcements from the White House that Japanese airplanes have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and have now attacked Army and Navy bases in Manila. We return you now to New York and will give you later information as it comes along from the White House.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And while this reply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiations, it contained no threat or hint of war or of armed attack. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.
First, the highlights in the war news before taking you to Washington for the direct report on important developments there. Berlin reports Japanese troops have crossed Thailand's border and have started a drive on the Burma Road. The report that Japanese troops have landed on Lubang Island in the Philippines is not confirmed. The island of Guam is reported still in American hands. Manila has had new air raid alarms, but no bombings are reported, and it's believed fifth column action may have been responsible. The latest CBS message from Honolulu says Hawaii is calm and morale high. The latest claims of the Japanese High Command reported in propaganda broadcasts from Tokyo describe destructive air raids on Malaya and a land attack on both Singapore and the British colony of Hong Kong. But the British say all these attacks are being resisted successfully. No confirmation yet as to whether the Nazis intend to declare war on the United States or whether Hitler will address the Reichstag as rumored. Russia seems to be doing better in the Moscow front, and Berlin makes no claims at all. Those are the highlights in the news to this moment.
This is William Winter speaking in San Francisco. San Francisco experienced its first taste of air raid warning last night. And when a second and a third alarm sounded during the night, San Franciscans seem to have become used to living in a city at war. Today, people seem to be going about their business as usual, except that the conversations in restaurants and street corners concerned the latest reports of Japan's attack in the Pacific, and people talked proudly about how they had remained calm through the night. A few minutes ago, the mayor of the city held a meeting of all civilian defense authorities in his office, and arrangements were made to broadcast air raid warnings over all radio stations in this area before they go off the air in the event of emergency. Instructions for air raid precaution were announced. People are to remain in their houses, stay off the streets wherever possible. Motorists hearing air raid alarms are to pull their cars to the curb, turn out the auto lights, and go to the nearest shelter. Householders were instructed to keep bags of sand handy around the house and keep bathtubs filled with water and keep garden hoses connected to faucets, just in case. At the meeting, Lieutenant General DeWitt, commanding the 4th Army of the United States, announced that last night's blackout of San Francisco was unsatisfactory. Death and destruction at any moment is now a possibility for an indefinite time as far as this coast is concerned, he said. Last night's air raid warning was not a practice warning. Enemy planes were over this area last night for an indefinite period, and why they did not bomb San Francisco, only God knows. Mayor LaGuardia and his Assistant Administrator of Civilian Defense, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, are in Los Angeles now conferring with officials, and there is word that they're expected soon in San Francisco. In San Diego, California, a group of Japanese, German, and Italian aliens are still in custody in local jails. Sacramento, the state capital, reports that the recruiting picture has changed overnight, and from border to border, from Canada to Mexico, draftees who once sought exemption now are clamoring to get into uniform. In Fresno, California, 2 Japanese were arrested. Their automobiles and elaborate motion picture and sound equipment was seized by police. Word has just come that some 91 Japanese, 60 German, and 16 Italian nationals have been taken into custody in Northern California by the FBI. And instructions have come from Washington, D.C. that no further Germans and Italians will be admitted to American citizenship until further notice. And this is William Winter in San Francisco, returning you to New York.
Go ahead, London.
London is not blinded by the fighting in the Pacific sector to the fact that there are many other sectors. In Russia, the Moscow radio broadcast a special announcement that Russian troops have recaptured Tigrin in the north, and we heard that broadcast in London. In Libya, the main fighting is apparently still going on between Tobruk and Bir el Gobi. Mobile British columns are also operating toward the enemy's lines of communications west of Tobruk, but here British action is limited by the presence at El Adam of a big enemy force of all arms. British Coastal Command planes attacked a large enemy supply ship off the Dutch coast and left the vessel on fire. The British National Service bill to mobilize fully Britain's man and woman power was read and discussed in Commons today, but there was no vote. Since the Axis struck openly at America, I've been talking to a great many Englishmen. But tonight, I had dinner with a large group of American reporters and correspondents who have been covering the war in Europe, only to find that the latest war news is now being made in America. These men and women who have watched the principal nations of the world drawn into the Second World War one by one were united tonight by two emotions. The first is a keen longing to be at home in this critical period. The second is a feeling of deep disappointment. Year after year, these American reporters have roamed the world to get the true story and to send it home. And now apparently the United States has been the victim of a sudden attack, and we here have suffered heavily. American reporters feel their work has been a failure. They have told the story year after year, but their fellow Americans would not pay any attention. And that's the brief story from London.
On December 11th, 1941, Hitler addresses the Reichstag and declares war on the United States.
Artikel 4. Dieses Abkommen tritt sofort mit seiner Unterzeichnung in Kraft und bleibt ebenso lange wie der Drei-Mächte-Pakt vom 27. September 1940 in Geltung. Die hohen vertragswidrigen Teile werden sich rechtzeitig vor Ablauf dieser Geltungsdauer über die weitere Gestaltung ihrer im Artikel 3 dieses Abkommens vorgesehenen Zusammenarbeit verständigen. Abgeordnete, Männer des Deutschen Reichstags, wir sind uns schon seit der Ablehnung des letzten Friedensvorschlags.
Countries like the United States and Great Britain are so backward that we will not accept any gifts from them. And these countries have done everything to prevent both Germany and Italy from creating the conditions necessary for their existence. But today, in 1,000 years of history, Germany has never been as united in National Socialism as before in any time of its history. And therefore, she will have the strength to secure for herself the conditions which are necessary for the fulfillment of her existence. National Socialist Germany is not only united, but has already far more foresight and a greater sense of honor than before. And therefore, I have given today the American chargé d'affaires his passports. In pursuance of the policy of world dictatorship, President Roosevelt has refrained from nothing in order to prevent Germany and Italy to create conditions which could secure their existence. Both he and England have opposed every revision. And in flagrant contradiction to international law, America attacked our ships, interned their crews, and in the end went even so far as to give the order to their navy, against all international law, to attack and sink the German ships, German and Italian ships, and German and Italian merchantmen. Since then, a plan set up by President Roosevelt has been revealed in the United States, according to which his intention was to attack Germany by 1943 with all the resources at the disposal of the United States. Thus, our patience had come to the straining point. We had always endeavored to prevent a breach for the United States. But now, Italy and Germany are forced in loyal fulfillment of their obligations under the tripartite agreement, to associate themselves with the struggle of Japan against America and England. With the singing of the German national anthems and 3 hails for the Führer, the 5th Reichstag session during this war was terminated.
Back at the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. And now the message from President Roosevelt has arrived. The reading clerk will read it to the House. We take you to the platform.
Congress of the United States. On the morning of December 11th, the government of Germany, pursuing its course of world conquest, declared war against the United States. The long known and the long expected has thus taken place. The forces endeavoring to enslave the entire world are now moving towards this hemisphere. Never before has there been a greater challenge to life, liberty, and civilization. Delay invites greater danger. Rapid and united effort by all of the peoples of the world who are determined to remain free will ensure a world victory of the forces of justice and of righteousness over the forces of savagery and of barbarism. Italy also has declared war against the United States. I therefore request the Congress to recognize a state of war between the United States and Germany, and between the United States and Italy. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the White House, December 11, 1941.
Hello, everybody. This is Station Debunked, the station that debunks war propaganda, war hysteria, war profiteers, and war criminals. We are on the air every night, 8:30 p.m. Central War Time, operating on 7.2 megacycles. We'll start our program in about 1 minute.
Poor Mr. Churchill, how do you do? Hello, 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 hello. Your famous convoys are not coming through. Hello, 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 hello. German U-boats are making you sore. You're a nice little fellow, but don't talk so much. With speeches one can win a war. Poor Mr. Churchill, how do you do? Hello.
And as we drove towards it, with our planes overhead giving us the sort of cover we'd been hoping for and which we'd been expecting, as we drove in, we could see shell bursts in the water along the beach and just behind the beach, and we could see craft in a certain amount of difficulty because the wind was driving the sea in with long rollers, and the enemy had prepared anti-invasion, anti-barge obstacles sticking out from the water. Formidable prongs, many of them tipped with mines, so that as your landing barge swung and swayed in the rollers, and they're not particularly manageable craft, it would come into contact with one of these mines and be sunk.
Here is a report from Charles Collingwood, Columbia's correspondent with the Navy, who was with a tank landing craft.
We are on the beach today, on D-Day. We've just come in. We caught a ride in a small boat which came in from our LST loaded with 1,000 pounds of TNT, half a ton of high explosive on this beach, which is still under considerable enemy gunfire. While we have been here, we have just seen one of the strangest and most remarkable sights of this invasion so far. Two great fleets of over 100 gliders have gone overhead, towed by C-47 transports, who are certainly proving the workhorses of this invasion. They've hauled them right over the beaches, and the second batch are droning over now. I can see them. They're casting off the gliders as they circle around over the beach, and the transports are circling around and beginning to make off home. And here comes another flight, the third flight of gliders, which is being pulled in. I can't count how many of them there are. They're coming in over the beach here. More and more and more of these glider-borne troops are coming in. These gliders are coming in towed very slowly by the big C-47s in what is apparently an unending stream. These boys are apparently having a pretty tough time in here on the beaches. It's not very pleasant. It's exposed, and it must have been a rugged fight to get it. We can look on down the coast now and see this flat part of the beach, which joins the water, going all the way down to the lower beach, which is marked for us by columns of white smoke which are rising from it. And further up at the end of this beach, we can see another huge column of white smoke, which has apparently been caused by naval gunfire. Looking out to sea, all we can see of the vast invasion fleet which is assembled for us are the silhouettes of the big warships, the battleships and cruisers, which have been putting a steady bombardment against the enemy positions all day. We're standing here. It's an absolutely incredible and fantastic sight. I don't know whether it's possible to describe it to you or not. It's late in the afternoon. The sun is going down. The sea is choppy, and the beach is lined with men and materials and guns, trucks, vehicles of all kinds. This place even smells like an invasion. It has a curious odor which we always associate with modern war. It's the smell of oil and high explosive and burning things. This has been a momentous occasion for all of us. On over here. Chamberlain, who is one of the sailors, has just come in with a handful of sand because he heard me say a while ago that what I wanted to do most of all was just to get ashore and reach down and take up a handful of sand and say, this is France, and I've got it in my hand. France at last after 4 years.
And now our correspondents are ready to report from abroad. First, Charles Collingwood is standing by in Paris, so we take you now to Paris. Charles Collingwood reporting.
Germany surrendered at 2:45 on the morning of May 7th, 1945. At that moment,
the great feeling of history in the making came on VE Day, the surrender of the German armies at Reims, which to me was the climactic event. We waited a long time. There were only 16 of us correspondents there, and the only reason I was there was I think I was chosen by lot. And I tell you, we waited a long time before they finally made the deal with the Germans, or the Germans made the deal with them. Then, late at night, this extraordinary scene of the German commanders coming in to surrender. But that's not the point of it. The point of it is that for all of us who had been through this thing for years and risked our lives and gone through some discomfort and so on, this seemed to us the end of one era, the beginning of another. That we had got rid of this invidious, vicious, evil thing of Nazism. And we had defeated it. And now there lay before us this prospect of a world of peace and prosperity and all the rest.
You think of London under the Blitz, when the sky itself seemed to burn and the noise of the German bombers and the sound of people's footsteps running. The day we hit the beaches of Normandy with the 88s coming in and the pieces of things floating in the water offshore. The way Algiers harbor looked when we sailed in on the blue water with the city rising up white on the hills around. You remember, too, the long, cold, muddy days when nothing went right and men were killed all around and nobody got anywhere. Then there were the days of liberation with the sun shining and people crying and throwing flowers and reaching out to touch you. And sooner or later, you think of the beginning of the war and the way it was then, September 1939. Or maybe it didn't begin then. Maybe it began in Spain or in China. But for this correspondent, it began in London in September 1939. We didn't know what war was then. You could buy anything you wanted in the stores. Your job wasn't any different than what it was before. Except for those who went into the army, it was just that someone had said there was a war. Everyone thought they could imagine then what it would be like. When the first false air raid sounded in London, everyone crowded into the shelters and had hysterical wardens shouting in their ears to put that cigarette out. Do you want us all to get killed? And then now, there's that final scene in the map room of the school building Supreme Headquarters in Reims. I stood in the back and watched the German plenipotentiary, Colonel General Jodl, sign the paper that meant it was all over. There they sat around the battered old table that you wouldn't have in your kitchen. And what they were doing was ending it all.
From the Mutual Newsroom in New York, Tokyo Radio says acceptance of Potsdam Proclamation coming soon. I repeat, Tokyo Radio says acceptance of Potsdam Proclamation coming soon. One moment, please. The bulletin from San Francisco. Tokyo Radio said today that an imperial message accepting the Potsdam Proclamation would be forthcoming soon. Repeating that bulletin from San Francisco, Tokyo Radio said today that an imperial message accepting the Potsdam Proclamation would be forthcoming soon. For the news, listen to your Mutual station.
Aflame with such a burning desire that only your kiss can put out the fire.
Just one moment, please. We're standing by in the Mutual Newsroom. Just one moment, please.
OWI flash.
From the OWI, the Japanese government has accepted the Allied surrender formula embodied in the note dispatched to Tokyo by the United States. The Tokyo Domai Agency said today in a wireless dispatch recorded by the Federal Communications Commission. We have another bulletin here. Japan surrenders. Japan surrenders. Now repeating the entire bulletin, the Japanese government has accepted the Allied surrender formula embodied in the note dispatched to Tokyo by the United States. The Tokyo Domai Agency said today in a wireless dispatch recorded by the Federal Communications Commission. This is not official. We're awaiting confirmation from Washington. This is not official. For the news, listen to your Mutual station.
As President of the United States, I proclaim Sunday, September the 2nd, 1945, to be VJ Day, the day of the formal surrender of Japan. It is not yet the day for the formal proclamation of the end of the war, nor of the cessation of hostilities. But it is a day which we Americans shall always remember as a day of retribution, as we remember that other day, the day of infamy. From this day we move forward. We move toward a new era of security at home. With the other United Nations, we move toward a new and better world of cooperation, of peace, and international goodwill. God's help has brought us to this day of victory. With His help, we will attain that peace and prosperity for ourselves and all the world in the years ahead.
This is the NBC mobile unit in the heart, center, and the pulsing focus of a joyous nation on Times Square in New York City.
Ben Grauer reporting as I literally stand tiptoe, sticking my head outside the silver gray turret top of the NBC mobile unit and look uptown over a foaming, seething, writhing mass of faces, lifted joyfully and buoyantly and gloriously happy at the final conclusion of a desperate war which has seen its closing days and a desperate day or 3 or 4 of anxiety, turmoil, anticipation, doubt, fear, and being cast down. Are these people happy? That's the only word to express it. Are you happy? And all I need to do is turn my NBC microphone down over these folks here and to see this wave of smiles, confetti, streamers, banners, bells, jingles, flags, horns, and a joyous, buoyant, glorious look on everybody's face. The reason for that is that a daring Marine has just leaped upon a representation of the picture of the flag being planted on the peak of Mount Suribachi in Iwo Jima and has raised a little but gloriously defiant American flag. And in victory, this little piece of bunting is going up to the top of the Iwo Jima. And now here's a sailor on the other side of this lamppost which says Times Square Broadway, and he has been kissed both by the grape and by a beautiful girl because he's climbed up that lamppost about 25, 30 feet high. Now he's in his own little crow's nest here in the heart of Manhattan, and he's waving a happy and joyous hello to everyone below him. He's got a rose stuck in his little pocket over his left breast, just above his campaign ribbons, and he's waving his hat happily in the air. Up above, I see nothing but a sea, a rolling mass of faces conspicuously marked by the white headgear of Navy boys. And down right here close to us, a quick glance at the massing, milling crowd would indicate that there's approximately 20% of servicemen. I think that's a fair estimate. They have been drawn to this, the focus and heart of New York City, and which expresses at this moment the pent-up jubilation and joy and relief after 4 years of war. Oh, he's made it! The sailor boy got to the very top of the lamppost and then reached the most precarious peak, and he's sitting right now on a representation of the seal of the city of New York. And he doesn't care if anybody knows it. Joy, glamour, beauty, excitement, and overall an expression of tremendous relief. I see also mixed in the crowd those who are silent, mostly older people. Many of them perhaps people who will carry the memory of a loved one who hasn't returned, whose sacrifice is continuous. I see many people who are standing mouth agape. The thing is so overwhelming that they can't express it in their own jubilation and just much others. And now the Marine's going up to challenge the Navy man up there. This, and ladies and gentlemen, is NBC's description from Times Square of a part of the VJ celebration in New York City. Ben Grauer speaking and returning to the NBC newsroom in New York.